Probably the most dangerous mission that I've had the opportunity to take part in was the escort of a intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platform. I was aware that only weeks prior, a weapon had been released by a Russian fighter in the vicinity of that river joint.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would also like to share with the House details of a recent incident which occurred in international airspace over the Black Sea.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has revealed today that a Russian fighter jet released a missile in the vicinity of an RAF aircraft in international airspace during a routine patrol over the Black Sea due to a technical malfunction.
The stakes are that much higher when flying those escort missions. I'm Buzz, I'm a Typhoon pilot in the Royal Air Force, and I've been flying for 11 years.
Hearing a radio operator that we were working with be shot by the Taliban. Very, very shortly after that, firing into an enemy position. 6-7 years of training coming to a head at that point. I'm Robbo. I'm a Typhoon pilot in the Air Force and I've been serving for 24 years. Sat on the end of the runway selecting max reheating a Typhoon is a feeling like no other. 40,000 pounds of thrust behind you. Climbs like a spaceship up to a speed of around Mach 2, so twice the speed of sound, which is about 1,500 miles an hour.
Typhoon's a multi-role, single-seat fighter. By its nature, Typhoon was designed to be an absolute killing machine in the visual arena, so when you are up close to the enemy and you can see the other fighter, being a single-seat, multi-role fighter pilot, that is the job. Kill people and break their stuff, as flippantly as it sounds. That is ultimately what it's about, that you need to be willing to do that, but also capable. And obviously with that comes a lot of responsibility and personal burden that everyone has to make their own peace with one way or another.
Typhoon looks cool, but it's not the most comfortable thing to sit in for 8 hours. Yeah, there's a lot of kit, a lot of equipment. It can be a very fatiguing environment. You can be strapped to that ejection seat for 8 hours at a time, sometimes under high G, wearing an awful lot of equipment, and particularly at night, flying with heavy night vision goggles weighing down on the front of your head while you're scanning the ground for activity. And it just requires that extra focus to keep yourself sharp for the entirety of a sortie. I find it hard to draw any other parallels in sort of regular civilian life to be on top of your game for flying an aircraft for 7-8 hours at a time.
You are subjected to significant G-force when you're in that fight. So in Typhoon, that limit is 9G. That's what the aircraft is capable of. So your body weighs 9 times what it does when I'm sitting here right now. And as far as what that feels like in the cockpit, pretty unpleasant. It's not. It is fun, but I wouldn't say it's a nice feeling. But you do get used to it. We train for it on the ground using a centrifuge, so that you're aware of the effects of G on your body, the physiological effects, what it does to you. But then the jet itself also provides you with various systems to help you deal with that G, such as G-pants, which squeeze your legs to force the blood back up into your brain and into your eyes, with pressure breathing, as well, so forcing oxygen into your lungs to keep them inflated. But yeah, it's not a pleasant experience, but it does mean that we're pretty lethal if you come up against the Typhoon in a fight.
In 2016, the squadron I was on at the time was at the beginning phase of the retaking of Mosul from Daesh, flying in support of the ground troops conducting complex strikes at night. Most of the friendly forces on the ground were attacking from the northeast in towards the city before the invasion proper. It was an exciting and nerve-wracking time. Overwhelming memory for me is the sights of the burning fires, the oil wells burning, seeing the trace of fire on the ground and the mortars. When you're flying on your own at night, it's quite an awesome but lonely experience to see that happening around you. Overwhelmingly, you knew that every day you got airborne that you'd probably be employing weapons that day. You certainly had to be focused, understand your airplane, understand your weapon system, because you would be using it and probably in close proximity to friendly forces. So calm precision would probably be the 2 words. And you do your weapon system checks and you release a weapon. The heart starts racing. You feel the weapon come off the aircraft with a massive thud. The 30 or 40 seconds from it leaving your aircraft to striking the target is the longest 30 to 40 seconds of your life.
You got it.
My first operational mission was on Op Shader. in Iraq and Syria, and that was a convoy support mission. Our task there as a pair of Typhoons was to provide airborne cover for a convoy of Allied troops on the ground and basically provide overwatch using our pods and our sensors to look along the road ahead of them, make sure there weren't any threats, and then just be there in case they needed us, in case they were engaged by the enemy at any point. So it was 3 hours flying in circles, looking at roads, looking at cars, and talking to the people on the ground. To be flying over that desert, a known war zone with live weapons for the first time, I had enough on my plate as it was. And speaking to the guys on the ground throughout, hearing their voice, how much they appreciate the fact that they know that you're there. So I think that's a big part of why it's so rewarding. It certainly focused the mind for the first time that we're now here, and if I'm called upon, I might have to release a weapon. I don't think you'd want to do this job, put in the amount of effort that you have done for as long as you do it, and then never get the opportunity to actually do the job and be put in that position. I think like anything, there also needs to be a certain level of personal preparation, almost making peace with the idea yourself that you are going to get airborne today with live weapons and you might be asked to use them. And that's something people deal with in their own way. You agree and believe that what you're doing is just and important and that it needs to be done. Some people it doesn't bother them at all, some people it probably bothers them a fair bit. Personally, it wasn't really something that bothered me that much. It's what we're here to do, it's why we chose to do this job in the first place. It's what you work so hard to have the opportunity to go and do, is to go and be in those situations and have to make those decisions. I think the consequences of failure in this job are obviously significant, and it's something we think about a lot on the ground. I think anyone would be lying if they said it didn't occur to them on the ground, especially when you first deploy on operations of some description in any theatre anywhere in the world, even when it's quick reaction alert back here in the UK. That is something you are definitely thinking about, the consequences of failure and making a mistake more than anything. But when you're airborne, those aren't the things you need to be thinking about. And I think that's important why people think about it on the ground beforehand, so that when you are in the air and you're in the cockpit, you don't have any of those thoughts. You know why you're there, you know what you need to do, and you know what you're going to do if something goes wrong. So that if it does go wrong, you just act immediately. You do the thing that you have rehearsed in your head 1,000,000 times over because you've thought about it before, and you've thought about it before because the consequences can be significant.
Controlling emotions is probably the most important part of being a pilot operationally. You hear a call for help on the radio, you can guess that it's you that's going to be called to assist. Your hearts start going. You hear a terminal air controller on the ground who would control your weapon start talking to you and giving you your attack plan, and it feels real all of a sudden. You know, this is the time why taking 30 seconds extra and getting it right is better than trying to save 5 seconds and getting it wrong. If you get emotional, you don't really think straight, so always take a breath, always count to 10. Not quite like what you see on the movies. I think, yeah, just taking a breath and taking your time is the way to do it.
Probably the most dangerous mission that I've had the opportunity to take part in was the escort of a intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platform. The Rivet Joint is a UK reconnaissance aircraft. Its primary role is to gather signals intelligence, so any emissions, radios, all that kind of stuff, and absorb that and then use that as intelligence to inform future operations. Going into the Black Sea for the first time to escort the Rivet Joint, I was aware that only weeks prior, a weapon had been released by a Russian fighter in the vicinity of that Rivet Joint.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would also like to share with the House details of a recent incident which occurred in international airspace over the Black Sea.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has revealed today that a Russian fighter jet released a missile in the vicinity of an RAF aircraft in international airspace during a routine patrol over the Black Sea due to a technical malfunction.
The stakes are that much higher when flying those escort missions. On that day in particular, I'm in the Black Sea, Rivet Joint's on my left-hand side with my wingman further off to the left on the other side. We hear a number of warnings from Russian ground controllers in broken English from a Russian voice warning that we are close to Russian airspace, albeit operating in international airspace, telling us to move away.
If you don't leave, you will be destroyed.
The next thing we hear is from NATO controllers who are controlling us that Russian fighters have been scrambled and that they're on their way to intercept us. So now I'm looking out over my right shoulder, and then 2 of them break out from the cloud, armed to the teeth, They pull up on my right-hand wing. They pull along in front of me alongside the rivet joint, and then they stay with us for the rest of that sortie as we orbit around the Black Sea while the rivet joint does its job. And we do our job of escorting him and making sure he's safe. Certainly that initial moment when I see the two fighters break out of the cloud, that's a real, oh, they've actually come. Up until that point, it was just someone saying something to me over the radio. That certainly heightens the tension a little bit. What are they actually going to do? How are they going to affect this intercept? What have they come to do? As much as I can make assumptions about what their instructions are and what their mindset is, you don't really know. I'm sure they're probably not very different to me, really, in the way they view their job. If you look at the start of any conflict, any major conflict over the last 100 years, a lot of them have come down to a single flashpoint of some description, which might be a misunderstanding. Things can get confusing very, very quickly. You don't want to be that flashpoint, but you also want to be there ready in case it happens anyway, if that makes sense. So there's a subtlety to it in how you manage it, and you manage it by being calm in the cockpit, being calm with the way you fly around behind the rivet joint, being calm in the way that you interact with the fighters that have come to intercept you. And I think we manage that really by thinking about it thoroughly on the ground, being really clear both as a formation and with the rivet joint of exactly what we're going to do in the eventuality that we are intercepted, and how we're going to behave so that, one, we don't surprise each other by doing anything erratic, but ideally so we don't surprise them. Certainly in my career flying Typhoon so far, the only times that a routine operational mission has become more interesting than we'd anticipated was usually due to our inability to air-to-air refuel, which is a very specialised skill set for fast jet aircrew. So certainly over Iraq and Syria, I've had plenty of occasions where I've been unable to refuel for whatever reason, either due to a serviceability issue with the aircraft or just as common as due to weather, especially at night. A difficult job anyway to put the probe into a basket which is being dragged behind an airliner. In the dark, that becomes even more difficult when you're trying to do it on night vision goggles.
Flying at night brings an extra level of challenges. Clearly, it's much harder to see things, but why does that matter? Because we're often operating in close proximity to other aircraft, so it relies an extra focus on those other sensors we have on the aircraft, such as the radar and data link, to ensure we have complete situational awareness. Also, if we do have an emergency or malfunction at night, there's an added layer of complexity. We might lose instruments, and clearly when you can't see the world outside the window because it's dark, adds an extra level of jeopardy.
I remember having one night mission over Iraq on Opshader. It was my first tour where I was a flight lead, so I had a wingman that I was leading around, so he was relying on me for my experience. The tanker that we were supposed to be taking fuel off of over Iraq didn't have enough fuel for us, which is pretty disappointing at 2 in the morning in the dark. And by this point, I'm 800 miles from home. I knew pretty quickly then that I was going to have to make some quick decisions about which one of us could take fuel and who was going to have to make an emergency landing at another airfield in Iraq, probably with no support, no engineering support on the ground. I lost, ended up being me. There's obviously a lot going through my head. First of all, making sure I land safely, but then also what kind of reception you're going to get when you get on the ground. You are now on your own, effectively, trying to land and refuel and prepare for takeoff a £100 million airplane that I've signed for and I'm responsible for.
Why did I join the Air Force? To be a pilot? It looked exciting, it looked challenging, it looked rewarding. Why do I still do it? Why have I strived to be a boss? Because I like being part of a team that's achieving something with a purpose. It's incredibly thrilling.
On face value, I'd say I do this job just because I love flying fast jets. There's nothing better than strapping into a Typhoon and going supersonic at 50,000 feet. I don't think you make the sacrifices that you do to be in that position unless you also care about the output, that the job is important and that someone has to do it. And I think sometimes that can get lost and people forget that. The role that we fulfill by doing that is crucial to everyone in terms of deterrence and protection of the UK and protection of our livelihoods and the way we live our lives. That's something I definitely didn't appreciate beforehand, before joining the Air Force when I was a teenager. You know, it's just flying jets and it looks cool and it's Top Gun and stuff. But there is loads more to it, the wider geopolitical situation and our role in that.
Ivory Eagle. If you don't leave, you will be destroyed.
You can imagine Russia shooting down NATO jets. There's probably no coming back from that.
In spite of the Russian radio message, new Typhoon pilot Josh and lead pilot Joe must continue their mission.
Sounds like a serious threat, but I guess we've got a job to do. So let's crack on.
Escorting the world's most advanced spy plane, Rivet Joint, as it gathers Russian military intelligence.
Pilot message. Go, Havoc. Havoc, activity, strength unknown. Do you hold them on your gadget?
A jet has been spotted coming out of Crimea. Josh is sent ahead to find out what it is.
Request, are you able to eyeball contact?
We're now just hawking all of our sensors, our radar, anything over the radio, listening out.
Havoc 2 nails Russian aircraft 050 degrees. Definitely fighter type, twin tail.
It's a Russian fighter jet, the same type which opened fire at the Rivet Joint in 2022.
Good eyeball, suspect flanker in the turn. Golf 020, Russian aircraft. Intercept in our package.
The Rivet Joint's got 20 or 30 people on it who have all got families. They don't have parachutes, they haven't got an ejection seat. If something goes wrong with that jet, or God forbid it gets hit, then they're going down.
To drag and see if we can, between us, maintain this track.
Josh and lead pilot Joe decide to fly in between the Russian and the Rivet Joint to shield it from being attacked.
Having a Russian fighter jet fully armed is probably about the most vulnerable I've ever been in the aircraft.
If he goes between us, stay behind him. If he goes between, then I will maintain behind him.
You don't want to do anything that could trigger a reaction. Whether that be turning a little bit towards them to try and get them on the radar scope, that could be seen as a hostile act. The risk of any miscalculation could be massive.
Hang on, where's he going here? He's positioning right behind you.
The Russian jet is closing in on Josh's tail.
I'm sat there, when I have a bit of a moment of realisation, I'm like, that is a Russian fighter jet. A very capable aircraft, probably with his radar locked on me, if not something else. You don't want to be the person that misconstrues what a Russian jet's done. You don't want to be the wingman that is the cause of all doom.
Ivory Eagle, Delta Echo Земля. You are approaching the state border of the Russian Federation.
We're running out of road with Crimea up ahead. I think that's us done. Yeah, makes sense. Hopefully the RJ's got everything it needs.
The RAF has reached their target location off the coast of Crimea, and the Rivet Joint has completed its mission.
We're going to come back to base now, unless we hear any differently.
Here, Wilco.
Just got to hold our nerve now, hoping that that Russian jet doesn't follow us.
Intercept turning right this time, course 270. Contact appears to have changed direction, is now heading more northeasterly.
The Russian fighter is heading back to base.
One has lost eyeball and radar contact. I'm just looking.
I heading further west. We're now heading back away from Crimea. Effectively, we're getting out of range of anything that they would care about. And they know that we're not a threat anymore, so we've left their sphere of interest.
It's been a good day out. Cheers.
So once the tactical portion of the mission was over, the rivet joint peeled off to head back home to Waddington. It sounded like they managed to get all of their mission sets done, whatever those were, so they left happy, which was great.
The rivet joint will analyse the intelligence it collected when back in the UK, before being shared with Britain's allies.